Joey, thank you for joining me on the Success Agent podcast. I ran into you in Las Vegas at the Zillow Unlock conference, and you shared with me your success in your first year. And one of the really important things for me with this podcast is to show all levels of production. If I were to only be interviewing the agents that sell 600 homes a year, but have been doing it for 15 years, it doesn't create context. And for most people that follow me, you guys know that's my favorite word in the English language. And the first part of the journey is also super important. So we're just going to have a conversation of how you got into the industry. Take us back because your career isn't 10, 15 years like a lot of the folks I interview. Just take us back to wherever you want to start before real estate. What career choices brought you into our industry? And then let's unpack your first year because you've had a phenomenal breakout year.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And it's always inspiring and encouraging to see, especially a CEO that interacts with agents on all levels and all types of platforms. So it's so fun to get that insight, and I appreciate being here. And so I'm from San Diego, was a police officer for about 8 years prior to moving to Georgia about 3 years ago, where I was recruited as a director of business development for a Medicaid healthcare company, where we provided in-home Medicaid services to the elderly and disabled individuals in the metro Atlanta areas in poverty who couldn't afford nursing homes. So we got them federally funded to be able to stay in their homes, and they wouldn't be homeless, and they would have services. And then throughout that process, I wanted more growth as an executive. I feel like I'm always looking for the next opportunity. And so I've always wanted to get into real estate. My dad was in real estate for about 12 years with Coldwell Banker in California. So got my license, and as soon as I started doing that, I actually ran into one of my college football teammates at the Battery during a Braves game, and I hadn't connected with him in a while. I was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm at EXP," and we connected over that, and the rest is history. So here I am.
And did you play college, high school? Or what level of athlete were you?
Yeah, so I played Division II college football, South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. Went out there, and small D2 school, but time of my life out there in the Midwest.
Nice. And so I always like to understand the transition because there's some folks that are still dual career. So did you get your license kind of nights and weekends? Did you start part-time? Did you build a reserve? Talk about the transition process into real estate.
Absolutely. So I did the online course, and it was, whenever I had time, I was studying while I was working full time. And it was just whenever I had the opportunity. I wake up at 6, I work out every morning at 6 a.m. So during that time, I would listen to the audio, go through in between when I was fulfilling my tasks at work or my job criteria. I would then study, and it took me about 60 days or so to complete the course and then take my test. While doing that full time, was kind of trying to do everything all in one, give it my full attention as much as I could.
Talk to us how you made the transition, how the first couple of weeks were, you know, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, getting onto in EXP is where I wanted to go based off just listening to Austin Lushart's overview of it. I basically wanted to have my own path and do my own thing in the way that I wanted to, without a lot of micromanaging. And it sounded like EXP was the perfect place to do that. And so I joined a Zillow Flex team with Harry Hinson's Dreammaker team, and got an amazing mentor, Tyler Hardy. Big shout out Tyler Hardy at EXP. And going through the process of, he basically told me, "Hey, I'm not going to help you write any deals unless you read every major form from start to finish. Like, you need to be invested and dedicated to this." And so I did, and I made sure I learned everything I could. And it's such a transitional process trying to learn, like, even what opening a super is. I remember calling him and being like, "What do I do with this? How do I even get into a home?" So, but it's step by step basis. It was learning how to take the skills that I utilized in my own career and own life and apply them to now cold leads, or picking up the phone and meeting with people, or studying the market. So it was a foundation building level, and it just keeps growing, and it kept growing from there. But into EXP was a very smooth and easy transition and process. And the way that it's set up just allows you to grow.
Well, I think we should have probably started it with the important part. So in your first year, 45 transactions, $15 million in volume. That is unheard of, right? So we actually track what we call, like, superstars in their first year, and we actually have been interviewing them. And The litmus test for us is 12 transactions. And the reason why 12 is still a breakaway year is because it's kind of a sequential process. Your first 90 days, it's probably zero. And then if you crush it in your first 6 months, you do 4 to 5. And then in the back half of the year, um, you do the balance, right? So tell us how that process went, because that's a super extraordinary first year. And I think you're 15 months in or so, 16 months in. What were the first 90 days versus the next 12 months? Tell me the timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just end of November will be my first 14 months ever in real estate, and in the first 90 days, I did 13 transactions. So
Close.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
So
So unpack that for us.
yeah, it was. I mean, I just was so blessed and fortunate to again have the support system, but it was really just trial by fire and running through it and failing forward. You're going to make mistakes, and I uh, like to achieve a certain standard for myself and my my clients and everything that I do. But there's so many avenues in real estate to know, and so throughout those first 90 days, and then after 90 days, I realized, hey, I might be onto something here, and I quit my corporate job and took on real estate full time. But
Okay, pause right there, Joey. So you were dual careering it the first 90 days and still sold that many homes? Continue. That is, again, extraordinary.
And so, in doing that, you also learn a life of balance, right? So, you have to make sure that you time block, set your priorities right, and that you really apply your time to things that are going to help you further and continue and grow. And so, I learned, part of my position as a director business development was to create scripts and talk to people cold leads over the phone and be a liaison with other companies, which translated into real estate, talking to clients over the phone for the first time, gauging those reactions, getting information that may be uncomfortable sometimes to get from people, but really trying to apply all my knowledge, skills, and abilities to that. And I think with honing in on those skills, and then plus what I learned from being a police officer, handling high stress situations, really molded me into what I'm able to do today. And with my background and what I've done, doesn't mean that everybody can't do it as well. It just takes a little bit of a adjustment of how you approach things. And I think that there's a certain mode and method that leads to success for everyone.
Did that discipline come from your athletic background? This is something I always try to unpack for folks. When you have a job, it typically comes with KPIs and a manager, and it's kind of binary, right? Attendance being the most important one. If you start a new job and you don't show up, you're fired in like 24 hours, 48 hours. It's super binary, right? In person, more obvious. Remote, you know, probably an extra day for them to find you, right? But if you pick up your phone or you just no showed on meetings and someone is paying you for your time, um, you wouldn't get to work there very long. Um, the leap to entrepreneurship or self-employment, whichever one you want to look at it, because by the way, in my opinion, there's a distinction. Like, you're still self-employed. You haven't gone full entrepreneurship in the sense that you now have an enterprise with expenses at scale. And I believe it's a sequence. And by the way, it's not a necessary one, it's just the distinction. But in both categories, and again, that's from the cash flow quadrant, the Robert Kiyosaki book that's 20 years old now. But the second you leave employee and move over to either the S quadrant or the B quadrant, no one cares. No one cares, right? No one is worried if Joey's got enough to feed his family and himself. No one calls to check in on you. Customers, if you don't respond to them, find another vendor. And so that's the hardest part, because there is a very rewarding dopamine loop that happens with completing tasks. And so I think the thing I see agents in general struggle the most with is the prioritization of those tasks. Because we could sit here and make a list with 100 things on it. And by human nature, you're going to pick the easier ones because it feels good to complete stuff. And especially when you're self employed and you don't have a boss, the only thing that can create reward in the brain is finishing stuff. And so It's very counterintuitive, but I encourage people. It's like you need to actually um, be okay with not doing most of the things on the list as long as you do the first couple of right things. And so it sounds like you've discovered that like in the first 90 days. Um, but that's the hardest part for not only new agents but seasoned agents. How did you find that so early on in the journey? What systems do you do to hold it accountable? Um, Talk to me about that part because that's the part I think anyone listening to this, no matter how long or how many transactions they do, they need to do.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think growing up in my lifestyle, I've played sports ever since I was a child, since I could walk. I was a quad sport athlete in high school. My dad was a police officer and real estate agent, so we kind of when he was a real estate agent, then he became a police officer and retired at 65. I became a police officer and then did real estate, so we kind of flopped career styles. But growing up in, I think I had a disciplined household already, and with that, it came like you said, it's you feel the dopamine of the reward through the success. And I think through that it was do well in school, do good in sports. The higher you hold your standard and the higher the achievement you can get to, the better your trajectory goes. And so with me, I've always had to time block. I've always had to be on time for things and make time for homework, for sports, for training, for workouts, for meal prep, things like that. And I think that really incorporated into what we do as entrepreneurs. We make our own schedule. And like you said, it's but the thing I love most about being an entrepreneur or being self-employed at this time is I am my own standard. Whatever I produce is my standard, and I'm the only one I can hold accountable. And I think that's probably the greatest thing in our industry. And so with me, it's really mentally focusing on even if things that I don't like. I listen to, there's this video, Mike Tyson, and he's like, I had to train my mind to say, things that I hate, I love it. I love to get up and train. I love to work. I love the pain. And, it's, I don't think it's that serious, maybe in real estate, but even if small tasks, like you're saying, if you're like, these aren't, this is something I don't want to do today. You have to reset yourself. You have to rewire yourself to say, I'm excited to call this client. I'm excited to write this contract. I am excited to drive to this home. You train your mindset to find all things positive in how you're approaching those things. And I think that the biggest thing for any agent, if I could give one piece of advice, would be reset yourself and reset yourself on every lead, every transaction, every client, every phone call, and approach it with the same high standard that you did your first time.
Is there a methodology that you do to reset yourself? Because again, you're saying things that are, in my opinion, pretty hard level that take discipline to get to. But like, what's the 0 to 1 process to do that?
I think it's just self-reflection. I think you have to have a conversation with yourself. Even when I need to reset, I think the word complain gets a bad rap. And I don't mean complain about other things in public or to other people, but I like to give myself a moment to, if I am not feeling something or if I'm not, in the mood or stressed out about something, it happens. I have a conversation with myself and I say, okay, here's what I'm not feeling. Here's why I'm stressed. And I usually give myself like 10 to 30 minutes and then that's it. After that time's up, it's like we need to move on and I need to move forward with what I'm doing. So, really being in tune with your own thoughts and how to have that conversation with yourself. Because, like you said, no one's going to walk you through that. No one's going to call you to make sure you get through that. And when you're a solo business, essentially representation of your brand, you have to be able to talk yourself into going forward and keep moving.
I also, looking through your numbers, saw you closed 3 listings. Um, Listings are normally something agents do in years 2, 3, or 4. I was encouraged to do listings from the very beginning. I had a limiting belief because I was 19 that people weren't going to trust me, that I wasn't experienced enough, et cetera, et cetera. Fill in the blank. Um, I've also met agents who come out of the gate swinging and like they're like, well, I'm just going to do those instead and jump right into them. It's very seldom. Um, Talk to me about your first listing. Like, was there any imposter syndrome? And then also, I'm almost going to challenge you publicly. Switch to listings as soon as possible, right? Statistically, the average listing takes 30 hours. The average buyer takes 87 hours. with quite a bit of driving around. So let's unpack kind of how you took listings, and is that a focus? And tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And this is such a great conversation that I have with other agents and realtors who are on my team or even in, whether you're a 20-year veteran or in your first couple of years or first year, it's like, what do you like more and why? And, in our industry, everything's always changing. Your mindset will change, your attitude will change about things. But I think that's also based on experience. And I think that somebody's personal experience with something specific can dictate how they feel about that process. But my first listing, oh man, again, huge shout out to Tyler Hardy. He co-listed my first listing with me, which was a buyer. Started out as a buyer, and um, you name it. I mean, I feel like I went through every type of hurdle and problem in my first 90 days, which allowed me to learn a lot. And so it was a couple getting a divorce, and there's a lot of things you have to know and criteria if someone's getting a divorce. And when they're selling a home between two people, there's a lot of documents, there's a lot of signatures, there are judges, divorce decrees, things like that. I was in over my head, but I said, I'm going to do it. I'm diving in. And so we had this, I had this buyer who bought a home, and now she wants to sell her home. And I told her, hey, we'll list it. We'll take care of it. Here's our marketing strategy. Went through, the comps, did my presentation of what we'll do and how we'll do it. And in the first 17 days, we went under contract. And so the buyer, everything ended up being great, and learning how to call the lender, understand how is this person qualified, what are we looking at in terms, how to read a contract. It's such a different experience from the other side, and you want to make sure that you get a qualified individual. But leading up to closing, we found out this person had a judgment lien against them, a tax lien. And I'm in vacation. I'm on vacation thinking, hey, this thing's going to close in a week. I'm getting a call saying, hey, we have an issue. I'm like, what? And so, I'm stressing out what's going on. And, not paying taxes and federal liens and things like that to an individual can get very complicated. And so at that moment, I learned that, not that nobody was helping the situation, but that if I didn't do something myself and get it done, that I don't feel like this thing would have gone forward. So I called the IRS, understanding how to get a federal tax lien taken care of. I called figuring out how long it takes to mail a payment schedule. I called to figure out what kind of payment can be made from the attorney at closing and to get this thing closed. I even walked the buyer's agent through this to get his client to be able to close. And so we ended up closing on time. And I remember my buyer client was crying because she's like, I just bought a home. I didn't even think this was going to happen, because they called her and letting her know, hey, we've got kind of a situation happening. And everybody was involved. And so through that process, I think listings gave me a big wide-eyed view of, hey, this is totally different from the other side. But I went in, to my next couple of listings, and on my third listing, again, was a buyer client who bought a home, and then I sold their home, and in the first day, I got 15 showings, 8 offers, and we closed 30,000 above ask. And we went under contract day one, and we closed in 16 days. And so learning the process of being so good with buyers, but then trying to transition my mindset to listings has been a process. But I have a listing right now, and you're always learning something. Um, but the process is very different. And I think it will be a challenge going forward. It is a lot, you have to have a lot more patience, I think, with listings.
When I do these, I always want to talk about evergreen content, but I'll give context. It's November of 2025. The country in general is shifting, and it's market by market. So, 16 days, multiple offers, that's not uncommon in a seller's market. The skill set you'll need to learn as inventory grows and market shift is understanding absorption rate, right? So, 0 to 4 months of inventory is a seller's market, and you typically comp it against the highest last comp and either push or list at that, and you end up with the situation you did. But once you get into about 4 to 7 months, it typically becomes a balanced market, and balance hasn't been around for a long time, so most people don't recognize it. I've had agents tell me the market's falling, and it's like, well, taking 60 days to sell a home for a list price or at or below is a normal market. We just haven't seen one in a decade. And then a buyer's market, it's already happening in certain parts of the country, is typically 8 months of inventory. And you have to be able to articulate to the seller. And, in a buyer's market, you could list the property at or below comps, have it show perfect, and in 90 days find yourself that that price is not aggressive enough and you have to revisit the price. And so that is a whole different conversation with the seller and setting expectations. And I say you have to spend a lot more time figuring out ready, willing, and able. So, talk to me about how you're preparing for that, or what skill sets or what places you're looking for information so you can be prepared to go after that market.
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it with what you said with transparent expectations. And I think that is probably the biggest point that I try to make, especially when working with clients, and B, talking to other agents about what it is that I make sure I do to make sure that this goes smoothly. Is you have to set transparent and realistic expectations for your clients. Don't oversell and put yourself in a position to underdeliver. Say, hey, I think this is going to happen based off of, and here's what to expect possibly coming up. You never want to have a client blindsided. So, for me, especially in our market in Georgia, we're kind of a different market because we are booming with new construction, new communities. We have a lot more inventory than we do have buyers right now, but homes are still flying off the shelf, and I think that also too contributes to uh, everything else. It's price, condition, timing. I mean, everything goes all in. But really, I try to trust myself and my instincts on how a home looks, what the prices are based off what sales are in the past year, what's happening right now in a market shift, being close to my lenders and getting information on what are rates doing, what are opportunities of how this market is going to look going forward for the next 30 to 90 days, reading market analysis every morning when I can, and putting all of that together and making sure that I make the most informed decision and the most um, well-rounded presentation to my client to give them those realistic expectations of where their house is in this current market structure.
Perfect. Well, measuring it in months is only good for like the first year and a half. So you're coming up on your first full year, so 2025. What are Joey's goals for 2026? And if I were to bring you back here end of next year, what's the world going to look like for Joey?
Oh man, gosh. Well, hey, I'm amazed that it looks like this right now. And you always strive for more. And I set a certain goal for things I wanted to achieve this year, reaching icon in my first year, which I did, reaching a certain, volume level and transaction level. And I always like to set my bar higher to try to reach it so I don't fall short. But I've also really become more motivated to coach and teach. And I've always been in that mode to help coaches of teams or other agents succeed. So I think that spreading my avenues of what real estate is into not only doing buying and selling, investing, but also helping other agents, regardless of where you are, achieve success in the same way that I have. Um, I think that's what you'll see in a year. I think you'll hear about me helping other agents and teams growing the value of what an agent is in our industry and making sure that we all provide the value that we believe we do and making sure that that standard stays high.
I'm not surprised that you came up to me and just introduced yourself, because that shows me how you've succeeded so far in this industry. And I always like to share those stories, right? Did you attended EXPCon?
Yeah, absolutely. Went to EXPCon and met you there as well.
But do you remember the opening act, uh, the rock and realtor who played the rock song at the opening session?
Oh man, put me on the spot. I don't.
Matt did a rendition of a couple rock songs. Um, I had seen his content and DM'd him, right? People who put themselves out there, whether it's on social or in person, create opportunity. So I always like to share these stories where, people reach out to someone. And again, it's in our world, it could be you guys reaching out to me with, an interesting story, right? It's saying, hey, by the way, we haven't met. this is what I did my first year and you got my attention, right? Um, but you guys should all have that thought process and mentality in your community, right? Are and I'm talking to the new agents listening, right? Are you being a secret agent or you're being brave and sharing with everyone in your community, whether it's the parents at the school, to your church, your community, your gym, whatever group of human beings you belong to, right? Um, Going back to that shift of going from an employee to a self-employed entrepreneur, um, you know, it's okay for you to be director of HR or recruiting at a company and not tell people. But once you are a business owner, and I don't care if you're selling real estate or opening up a sandwich shop, a matcha place, and that one's top of mind because there's these two younger girls who graduated college who are opening up a matcha shop in my neighborhood, and they're going viral on TikTok. They haven't even opened yet, but it's coming up in my feed because of zip code geo farming. And my wife and I were just joking, like, "Hey, I can't wait for this place to open," only because they're being so loud on social, right? So we now live in an attention world. You can't be a secret anything, secret agent, secret entrepreneur. um, we live in an attention world, and it is your job to make sure that everybody knows how you feed your family.
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. And it's wild to me because I didn't have social media or any marketing for my first entire year. I was completely dark, had no Instagram, Facebook, nothing, and just put my head down and just did strictly real estate. And I think that's important, and that's where the industry is going, and everybody does it in a different way. But now, to your point, I've now just launched my Instagram, just launched my Facebook, Google business profile, and you're right, you're not known unless you're seen, and that's the digital age right now.
It was a pleasure to get to know you and tell your story a little bit better, and I look forward to seeing your progress in the industry.
Absolutely, thank you so much for having me, and I truly appreciate it.